particularly one as salient as this issue was to our country. Things have gotten so bad for educators wrapped up in this that if you read the complaint, you'll notice that we've left the educators anonymous. Several of our members have already experienced an invasion of their privacy, and we don't want to expose them to additional personal risk. That's why you don't see an educator standing up here with us today. They're focused on their work in the classroom for starters, but some of them are also terrified, and obviously what we have proved to point out in court is that they have had their fundamental rights to political speech chilled by this government in the state of Texas. In closing, we filed this lawsuit because educators don't give up their constitutional rights when they take on their first teaching job. And we'll make that case and defend our members in court if that's what it takes. Now I'd like to turn it over to our national affiliate president, Randy Weingarten. Randy?
So I'm here today. I'm not a Texan, as you all know. I'm a New Yorker. I'm here today to support our members, to support our colleagues in Texas AFT, to support ZEF, and to make sure that teachers around the country know we have their back. What we're doing here today, and I very proudly wear the American flag. I am a patriotic American. I believe in American values, and there is no more fundamental of fundamental rights in our Constitution than the right to express ourselves peacefully and nonviolently. Educators don't lose those rights, those fundamental rights, when they teach in classrooms. In fact, most educators go into teaching because they believe in America and America's fairness and America's goodness and America's democracy. And so educators that day, that heinous day that Kirk was assassinated, they were in their classrooms working like they do every day, devoting their lives to meet the needs of kids. And what they needed from the superintendent was they needed advice and counsel about what you do when the entire world now sees an assassination in a completely age-inappropriate way on every social media channel there is. They needed their superintendent in the state to give some advice and some clarity on how we make kids feel safe the next day, how we help their parents, how we help each other, since it terrorized everyone. And instead, what happened was it got blame and shame and a star chamber. And so at the heart of this case, it is about Mr. Morath's actions and continued actions and the danger that it's doing to an environment of teaching and learning. Not just for the more than 300 people who have been investigated, but what it means in terms of how do you teach? How do you deal with issues that are tough, that are hard? And so let me be crystal clear. Speaking for the AFT, both the AFT and Texas AFT denounced political violence. We abhor political violence. We denounced it within minutes. I denounced it within minutes of when I saw it. We denounced Charlie Kirk's assassination. We denounced violence after Uvalde. We denounce violence. We denounce violence after Rob Reiner's death, after Melissa Hortman's death. But today, And what happened in the next few days wasn't about violence or denouncing violence. It was about muzzling the expression of constitutionally protected nonviolent speech. So the governor of Utah did what so many of us did, but he did it brilliantly. He tried to de-escalate. He tried to bring people together, as he was also doing what they had to do to find the killer. And tried to find a way, like former presidents of the United States that same day, how do we bring people together? How do we denounce this kind of violence? But Ms. Morath instead decided to exploit the tragedy of Mr. Kirk's senseless murder. His actions were, and as you heard from Zeph, who's been trying to meet with him and talk to him about this, his actions were a transparent effort to smear and shame educators, to divide our communities, and deny our kids the opportunities to learn and thrive. They were a state-sponsored attack on teachers because of what these educators were saying, not in classrooms, but privately in their own social media pages, as human beings trying to themselves deal with what they had just seen. And frankly, even if we think some of the speech that people made in the aftermath of Mr. Kirk's heinous assassination, even if we think it's noxious speech after Rob Reiner's murder, Melissa Hortman's murder, senseless gun violence that we see throughout this country, there is a difference between liking and disliking speech and defending one's right to speak. That is the essence of democracy, to defend one's right to speak. That is the essence of what America is about. And you don't lose your constitutional rights when you decide to become a teacher. The Constitution has to work for all Americans, not just some Americans. So the effect has been, not only in Texas, but other places, this chilling effect, this threat of job loss for, quote, reprehensible and inappropriate content on social media, end quote, is so vague that the vagueness is the point. Many of our members have simply stopped expressing their views altogether, both privately and publicly. And you already see it, as I've said, that the plaintiffs in this case are anonymous because of fears of invasion of privacy, of doxing, of further retribution. And we don't want to expose them to even greater risk. These are people who have been teaching for years. Judge them by how they teach, not by their views, their private views of what happened in a terrible, traumatic assassination. There are concrete career consequences for our members. Mr. Morath's letter has been used to target, retaliate, and discipline Texas AFT members who simply expressed a viewpoint that Mr. Morath disagrees with. It's literally the classic definition of a First Amendment violation. This is not political. If the superintendent, if the commissioner in New York State had done the same thing, we would be suing there. We shouldn't be living in a country where you lose your First Amendment rights, your constitutional rights, if you disagree with a governor, a president, or a mayor. All of us have to be better than that and have to understand we have to fight for each other's right of expression. That's what we're trying to do here. So the complaint spells out how some of our members have faced serious consequences, from written reprimands to investigations to full termination, all of which having nothing to do with their actual job performance and having nothing to do with impacting any of their work environments. So that's why we're here. We asked Mr. Morath, as Zeph just did, to work this out with us because we need to help teachers teach. Don't make their job harder. Their jobs are hard enough. Private time is private. And it doesn't matter, as I said before, whether the speech is left or right. Educators can't lose the right to express themselves as citizens, as Americans, because they do the work that helps make every other profession. Teachers' right to free expression and their job to educate our kids and exercise their judgment, these should not be in conflict. We need to have the same rights, school teachers, as every other American. And that's why we're in court today. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. And in closing, before we move to questions, none of this happens in a vacuum. It all happens in context. And I just want to remind everyone here today, something that not one of our educators, and I would dare say our parents and most of our students, forget every single day that they walk into a school in the state of Texas. They walk into a school in a state that has the most instances of gun violence in our country. And if you do not think that that has a direct impact on the social, on the emotional well-being of everybody in that classroom and not just the teacher, then we have a priority issue that we need to discuss in the state of Texas. All of this time, all of this energy could have been focused on making everyone safer rather than cheap political points that do nothing but make our entire environments worse. That's what educators were thinking about when this happened. And it's what they think about, it's what they thought about when Uvalde happened, it's what they thought about when Santa Fe happened, it's what they thought about when South Dallas happened. And I'm deeply concerned of what they're going to be thinking about and what is going to be the recourse to even feel like they have a voice in what happens to them every day the next time it happens in one of our schools in the state of Texas. Because we've chosen to do no more today than we did after Uvalde, no more today than we did after Santa Fe. Thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions. I wanted to make sure everybody knows as well, too, you should have received a stamped copy of the full media release in the media, the full lawsuit in the media release that was released. So we'll take questions from the court.
I'm Kelly with KXAN. I have a question. How does Texas compare in the way that they've handled this? How do they compare to other states?
So there's two states, there's only two states actually, where a state superintendent went out immediately and sent a memo that essentially said, we welcome complaints of reprehensible conduct so that we can fire teachers. I'm paraphrasing. and those states were Florida and Texas. Every other state, and we were in touch with leaders for the next several days because everybody wanted advice about what to do, how to help, as Zeph just said, how to help kids remember those few days. Everybody saw, Charlie Kirk was on a campus answering questions, and he was assassinated. Just think about what happened, those people who remember what happened when JFK was assassinated. People remember it was etched. And lots of teachers and lots of parents were trying to figure out, how do we support our kids? There were a lot of us that were doing things all over. I wrote a memo to the field that night about how to de-escalate. That's what superintendents should be doing. How do we de-escalate? How do we find a way that we bring together American values, that the goodness of people outweigh the bad? How do we deal with people who are traumatized? That's what a lot of leaders were doing. That not all, as we know, but I don't really want to get political. That's what a lot of leaders were doing, right, left. And so over the course of the next few days, we saw pockets of issues where somebody was trying to fire teachers. Even after the vice president had a podcast saying, we'll fire people who said bad things about Charlie Kirk, most superintendents and most school districts basically were like, no, let's get back to business. Let's figure out how we make people feel safe, how we deal with these things. So that's why those two were really outliers.
What specifically are you asking the court to do in this matter?
Thank you for asking that question. We're asking for an injunction to basically stop this kind of retaliation and stop this. We're not asking for money damages. We're asking for an injunction to stop the conduct, and we're asking Mr. Morath to write a different kind of memo about what to do in situations like this.
Are you asking for teachers who've been fired discipline to have those firings or disciplinary actions reversed?
Yes, but we have four people that we have specifically talked about in the complaint, and those four people, we're asking for their specific discipline to be reversed, but we're also asking for for this memo to be withdrawn, and for there to be, that you judge teachers' conduct based upon their work in classrooms.
And
Part of the reason why this is so important is it's not just one set of investigations that our members are having to go through. Their employers at the school district level are conducting their own individual investigations, and there's a level of uncertainty. Even if you were cleared at the school district level, there's a level of uncertainty as to whether you're going to be able to maintain a job based on what the state is doing, because what the state holds power over is their certification. And if their certification is impacted via suspension or revocation, then they're automatically losing their job, regardless of what their own district found at their own level. And that is a huge part of this case, because free speech is also contingent upon the lack of disruption. And as I said earlier, the only disruption that we've seen in our schools have come at the hands of Mike Morath and the way that he's handled this, or come at the hands of people like Briscoe Kane, who have used their own political careers to have stepped on teachers to further enhance their own political careers. That's part of why we're asking that anything that comes out in an injunction, for anything that comes out of these investigations, to not be able to be used, because the state has the authority to send that information over to the State Board of Educator Certification, where they can then take action, reopening this entire saga for people who thought they had this closed months ago.
So the specifics, if you want, are that we're asking the court to stop the commissioner from enforcing the policy, asking the court to have the commissioner retract the policy and end all related investigations. And we're also asking for a new letter to superintendents clarifying that the TEA does not mandate such actions.
Sorry.
What's happening to educators who are still under investigation right now?
So that depends. Primarily right now, it depends on what's happening at their local level with their districts. Some of them have been returned to classrooms. Some of them are still waiting in temporary reassignments until their investigations are cleared. Some of them have been provided reprimands that say you violated our policy, even though that they were on their own private page, on their own private time, but they've been put back to work at that level. They are not necessarily done, however, because as we heard the commissioner talk about the 350 cases that were turned in as complaints, has been sifted down to roughly half of them that they're doing further investigation on. Those are the ones that we're unsure about because an ongoing investigation is not going to get reported out to all of us in the way that it should. So that's why we're taking this action now before it gets to that place, now that we have factual evidence that these types of incidents are taking place with some educators across the state. We know that there are more out there, and we suspect after this press conference we'll probably be having more educators across the state asking to sign on and be part of this lawsuit.
There are 4 of your members are in the lawsuit. Do you have an estimate of how many of your members total are impacted either at the district level or by the state investigations?
I mean, it's really hard to tell because one, if nothing has been said to an individual, they don't want to speak up about it. The ones that have contacted us are in the tens, I would say anywhere between 50 and 100 individuals that have contacted us based on some level of engagement or involvement to either seek advice or seek support in how they're dealing with things at the school level. Despite what the commissioner's office did, probably at behest of the governor, most of the cases, many of those cases, did result in they're not finding that they did anything wrong, but to almost a T, every single one of them were told that they were required to report the incident to the Texas Education Agency. So many of them did get cleared at their local level, but they still have a level of uncertainty until the state cases are completely adjudicated or completely processed through. They don't know what could happen next.
Litigation can sometimes take a long time, and the TEA has said that there are 95 complaints that remain open. If all of those complaints are clear, what does that do to your lawsuit? Do y'all still ask the state to reverse this policy?
Yes, absolutely. One, because first of all, this shouldn't have happened this way, and I hope it's a lesson that every Texan leaves out of this, and particularly our government, that there's got to be a better way to address and deal with this issue than the way we've dealt with it in the state of Texas. 2, we know that part of those 95 cases, people have already had actions taken against them. Being terminated, getting a letter of reprimand, that could then be the basis of further disciplinary action in the future. So what we would want to make sure is these individuals are held harmless. If there's something else that comes up in the future, this isn't used against them in some way unfairly, as a snowball, because that's what happens in school districts. Unfortunately, without a court order or without some official signed off piece of paper that says otherwise, every single thing that happens to our members in schools had the potential to come up 10, 15, 20 years later.
And right now, you know that there's 95 cases left in the aftermath of us filing this lawsuit.
Yeah.
Before that, they would not even tell us what was left or not left. So the transparency is never there, which is part of the reason that we had to be, we were forced to file a lawsuit. Our state federation president has asked the commissioner several times to work things out on this, because teachers, to the point of that, the last questioners, teachers are scared. We need to respect teachers. They hold our future, and they're scared. Things happen every day in America. Their kids are asking them questions. We're talking about private conduct. We're talking about what happened on their Facebook pages. We're not talking about what they did in classrooms. But teachers right now, if something happens in America, they don't know what they can or can't say. You don't want to put anybody in that situation. You want teachers to have the confidence to use good judgment, to be able to actually help answer students' questions. And what's happening right now is this long arm of the state pulled out private social media, where somebody might have said, why are we not having the same kind of conversation about what happened at Uvalde? I mean, this is what we're talking about here. And so so they have this hanging over their head for what could be forever. That's why we're asking for the policy to be rescinded. And for everyone who's been involved in this, there's an issue in conduct in classrooms. That's one thing. This is private conduct.
Can you put a finer point on private social media? Are you talking about pages that are only open to like friends, people they let in, or is it any social media that can go out?
Well, it's if someone look, we have now suggested to people that they should change their settings in their Facebook pages if they intend it to be just private for their family or friends. Some of this conduct was that, and somebody saw it and used it anyway, took a picture, used it, and it was clearly completely private. But with all respect, most of our members never thought about changing the settings on their Facebook pages. Never thought about it. They intended it to be, to their own social media, but they never thought about it.
I mean, some teachers will, some of their students don't, interact with them. I've got, teachers in my family that
Right.
disguise their names.
Sure.
I mean, we in the few days that followed, we did all sorts of professional development of how to make your, social media private.
And just like your family and friends, or many of our members, they've got separate pages. They may have one that is specifically tied to anybody associated with school, and one that is completely private. And even in those cases, their speech was basically sought out. In most cases, after politicians brought it out to people in their sphere. Where people were seeking out specifically anybody that they could associate with a school, with a fire department, with another public entity that said anything whatsoever to turn in. It was, in fact, a witch hunt in many cases.
It was weaponized.
Social media policies that a teacher or an educator might sign at the behest of their employer. Here are the guardrails, and if you go outside, then we can.
There are different policies. School districts set those policies at the local level, and they are not necessarily uniform across the state. This is part of the problem, not just within our own profession, but frankly, with social media across the country. This is why this particular issue has been a topic in Congress in the United States on what are the responsibilities that social media providers have to try to control this issue. It's going to be another set of free speech issues that we'll let somebody else litigate for sure. But right now we've got to get a handle on what's happening directly in our profession, because we've talked about or been talking about today the consequences for the potentially 95 individuals that are still open cases on. we haven't even gotten to the overall impact this is going to have on the academic environment in our world and in our profession. I can tell you right now, it's not just the 95, it's the 9,500 others that are in schools right now thinking twice about what they say when any type of current event happens in their classroom. How do they respond? Because of the lack of support, because of the lack of guidance and direction from the head of our agency, they're each one individually or with their school districts trying to figure out how to move forward with this. And the answer, just like when we don't have a superintendent in charge or somewhere else, is paralysis. People do nothing. They say nothing. So kids are not getting the critical thinking that they should be getting in many of these cases across classrooms, because we have allowed a vacuum to happen, and we've allowed terrible, I hope unintended, but definitively terrible consequences to happen to people for simply speaking out, as any one of the rest of us should have had the right to do.
Last question, and any questions?
Let me just say, we have a case in New Hampshire that's on exactly the issue that Zeph just said, which we have won. It's now on appeal. That, where you had a New Hampshire school superintendent who created a snitch line for if they didn't like what social studies teachers were saying in classrooms. And the court struck it down, saying that the state standards say you have to teach all aspects of an issue. You have to help kids learn critical thinking. Sorry, I'm putting my social studies teacher hat on. And yet, the divisive concept law that was passed was in direct conflict, that basically said you can't teach divisive conflict. You can't teach divisive topics. So literally everything in current events in social studies these days is divisive. And so it left teachers saying, we have no idea what to do. We have to teach critical thinking. We have to get kids to understand how to understand a topic, how to look at it from various different angles. And so that case we have going on in the federal courts in New Hampshire. That's different than this case. This case is about I want to be really clear. We're not talking about, we would like to talk about it, but we're not talking about in this case what happened in classrooms. We're talking about school teachers when they were not in classrooms, in private, on their own social media, commenting on a matter that everyone in the country and the world saw, and they don't lose their rights to do that because they teach.
Yep.
Real quickly, I'm curious, and y'all's lawsuit talks about how there hasn't been similar state policy for other kind of major events, like in Minnesota, with Democratic lawmakers there, or other situations. I'm curious in y'all's kind of digging for this particular lawsuit, and did y'all run into any instances where maybe districts didn't act as punitively for maybe similar situations? Hopefully the question makes sense, like where they acted, differently or treated those situations differently maybe than they have in this particular instance.
I can only speak from what we've seen so far in coming through this in our particular state. I think, frankly, most of the districts we've seen have responded to what they feel like or felt like they've been required to respond to by the state. So whether it was after the death of Rob Reiner, whether it was after the death of the politicians in Minnesota, we saw no district across the state of Texas take any action whatsoever, saw no one policing anyone's social media. So they haven't, to my knowledge, compared it in the way that we're probably comparing it, because they haven't been required to by the state, because the state has chosen, the state has chosen to put their viewpoint bias in one direction only. And most, what we saw from many of these superintendents of these school districts is, just I guess probably like many teachers, is they're compliant and they're going to be compliant. And that is why we're forced into the situation of having to have this issue adjudicated in federal courts.
I've seen nothing personally, I'm not saying that it, look, there's 16,000 school districts, 100,000 schools in 50 states and 5 territories, so it's not like I've seen everything. I've never seen what the Commissioner of Education in Florida or in Texas did in the aftermath of Kirk's assassination. I've never seen something in modernity. You know, it looks like what happened in the 1950s, in the McCarthy era, but I've never seen anything in modernity be something like this, where somebody said, look for, find, if somebody said something you don't like about Charlie Kirk, report them so we can fire them. Essentially, that's what they said.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
All right, lots to work with.